I think we'll stay with, let's stay with the pink one. We may get to the yellow one later.
Can you mention something when we're in that duration and we fall asleep? Does that matter with
Nope.
this?
Not at all.
Because a lot of us, we're up at 4 and we're in that. I'm at duration at 8 or 9.
If we have questions, if we have time for questions, please raise that.
Okay.
It'd be a good one. Okay, if we can gather, let's move to the next letter of Venerable Bruno to Gabriella. So we're still in the, whatever we call it, purple or pink handout. Okay, let's look at the second letter now. And this letter is written 14 months after the preceding letter. And the occasion for this letter is that Gabriella's son Clemente is studying in Turin at the time, and he is about to leave Turin to make the trip home to visit the family. And so Venerable Bruno writes a letter of spiritual guidance to his mother. So the difference of this letter with the preceding letter is that this time Venerable Bruno is not answering a letter from her. He's just taking an opportunity to send her a letter. So he says, Madame, I would like to use this opportunity of the departure from Turin of Monsieur, your son, that's Clemente, for some profit. He's 16 years, 16 years old at the time. So like a high school son who's coming back to visit. I would like to take this use the opportunity of the departure from Turin of Monsieur your son for some profit, but I do not know of what I should speak. All right, because he hasn't had any spiritual news from her recently, so he's not sure how things are for her spiritually. Now, what that does is that since he's not replying to a letter from her this time, basically you're just going to get pure Venerable Bruno. His heart is going to turn to the things that are central to him and that he will always want to encourage a person to in the spiritual life. I do not know of what I should speak. Should I praise you for your fidelity to God? Ought I chide you? I do not know at all. All right, so since I don't know how things are with you, I will take a sure course. So I'm just going to say what's always going to be solid and applicable in any circumstances. And look where he starts. So I will take a sure course, and that is to counsel you to what? Begin each day. Begin. You know, we have in one of the early biographies of Francis of Assisi a time when he's on his sickbed and he only has months to live. And he turns to his Franciscan brothers and he says, "Let us begin, brothers. Let us begin." St. Ignatius of Antioch, on his way to Rome, this man in his probably mid-70s, grown holy in the Lord. And in the letter that he wrote to the church at Ephesus, he says, "I am now beginning to be a disciple." I remember in 1995, now St. Teresa of Calcutta came to Boston, where I was living at the time. Before she came to Boston, she made a stop in New Bedford, which is a smaller city about maybe an hour south of Boston. And of course, the mayor was there to greet her. And then they helicoptered her up to Boston. And the mayor of New Bedford was interviewed in the Boston paper, just what was your impression of Mother Teresa? And she said, "She is the youngest 84-year-old I have ever met." Begin. Begin. The best part of your spiritual life lies ahead of you. The doors are all open. Don't wait. Begin. So this is the first thing that he'll say to her. And don't even begin just occasionally. Begin every day. That's the first thing that he says to her. I will never forget, I put this in the biography. I was writing all of this in the biography, and it was a time of discouragement. Something had happened the preceding day which hadn't gone well. And I felt like I'd missed an opportunity that just wasn't going to come back. You know that feeling like I didn't do it well and there are consequences and the opportunity is not going to come back. And I went up to our community chapel. I can still see it on the fifth floor of our building in Boston on a Sunday morning just to spend some time in prayer before heading off to the parish and for a full day of engagement with the people on Sunday. And I was looking forward to it. I love the parish and the work with the people there, but here was this space of grayness in my heart. You know how we are at times like this? So you're working with the children, with your spouse at work, and you do your best, but there's that weight. There's that grayness that weighs upon us. And I had the feeling I was about to leave the chapel to head off to the parish with the sense that it would be a good day, but this grayness was going to be there all day long. And then because I was writing that book, it came right into my head. I think it was God's grace. No, look, you've been writing about all of this. Do it. All you have to do is just turn to God and say, I'm sorry, sincerely, which I was, and begin again. And I felt like now I know what he meant because I could feel my heart lift. The sense that the doors aren't closed. If that opportunity didn't go the way I wish it had, and God has a million ways of opening other doors of grace. It's never too late. And I could go to the day of involvement with the people with a light heart. So this is the very first thing that he says to her. Please take it to heart. Again, if there is anyone here who is feeling discouraged, that it's too late, that I have to settle for less, you don't. All you have to do is turn to God, ask forgiveness again if you need it, and then begin. Now, today, this afternoon. So I will take a sure course, and that is to counsel you to begin each day, and this next is lovely, abandoning the past to God, to the Lord's mercy, best hands in which it can be, and the future to his divine providence. Sometimes what discourages us today is what's happened in the past in our lives when I failed you, Lord. And that drags. You know, it's like, anybody seen the movie The Mission? You remember when the man who has killed another in a duel is doing the penance and he's going up almost the cliff and he's got with the ropes attached to all his armor and everything that's heavy weight, and then the Indians come and they cut the rope and he's freed. If any one of us is living like that in the spiritual life, with the heaviness because of what I've done and failed to do, just what I've been in the past, leave all of that to the mercy of God. St. John Vianney said in one of his sermons to his people in this little country parish, our sins are like little grains of sand compared to the mountain of God's mercy. They just disappear. Wash me, I'll be whiter than snow. As far as the east is from the west, so far he puts our transgressions from us, as we read in the Psalms. Leave the past to the mercy of God. Let that weight be lifted from your heart. And not only the past, sometimes what weighs upon us is the future. Anxieties, worries, concerns. It's hard to find peace. What if this... Leave all of that to God's providence. Couldn't be in better hands. Now I know this is easier to say than to do, but let's hear it and humbly try to live it. And we'll see that this can grow in us. And then the present, which is really all that we have. All that God wants us to live is the present. The past is gone, the future isn't here. What we have is the present. The present gets so much lighter. It gets so much easier to live it. We overcome spiritual discouragement. We overcome God. We allow God to overcome it in us. All right, he goes on. In the meantime, reflect each day. Every day, think about this, that you are entrusted with a mission by the good Lord. This is absolutely key about our lives. Do you have this husband, this wife? Do you have these children, these grandchildren, these relatives? Do you live in this house, in this city, in this place? Do you have these issues of health that you live with? Do you have these financial issues that you live with? You have everything you need to live the mission that God has given you. You don't need anything else. Reflect each day that you are entrusted with a mission by the good God, and nobody else has been entrusted with this mission, to live in this family, with these family members, in this place of work, in this involvement in the church, and so forth, with these issues of health and everything that we've said. In a famous meditation, now St. John Henry Newman writes, God has created me to do him some definite service. Now before we go any longer, just look at that line. Before we go any further, God has created me to do him some definite service. There is a reason why God brought you into the world now and here. Some definite service. He has committed some work to me which he has not committed to another. Each of us is in this world because God has given us a specific work which he has not given to any other person. No one else is the husband or the wife of this man or woman. No one else is the mother or father of these children. No one else has these opportunities in the workplace or knows these people through involvement in the parish. And I love the last little sentence there. This is exactly what Venerable Bruno is asking Gabriella to think about every day. I have my mission. You know how sometimes we feel, I could become holy if only, and you can complete this all different kinds of ways, if only I didn't have to live with him or her. If only I wasn't stuck in this job. If only the family didn't have these struggles. If only I felt better physically, and on and on and on. No. You already have everything that you need to be holy. I was reading this on the plane as I was coming here, just preparing for today, and it really spoke to my heart. I found myself thinking, you know, it's not enough just to say this. You need to start living this. And then everything gets so much easier. We're not responsible for the whole world, but we are responsible to love the people that God has given us. Do you love your wife? Do you love your husband? Here's 3 questions for every husband and wife in the church today. And I'll invite you to consider sitting down together today or tomorrow. Don't let too much time go by. And then ask each other these 3 questions and really, really answer them for each other and really receive the answer. First question, am I making you happy? Second question, what could I do to make you happier? Third question, what could I stop doing to make you happier? You have a mission. This is where God put you. As God called me to be a priest and to do this work, God called you to be this husband, this wife, this father, this mother, to work in the world, to be part of all the rest of us. And all we have to do, leave the past to God's mercy, leave the future to his providence, live today as a response to the mission that God has given you, which he's given to no one else. When the angel Gabriel comes to Mary and asks her to be the mother of God, there's no other Mary. Just like there's no other wife of this man, no other husband of this woman, no other parent of these children or grandchildren. Each of us is so beautiful and important in God's eyes. St. John Paul II always spoke about the dignity of each human person. And you remember this phrase that he used over and over again, each one of us is unique and unrepeatable. Each one of us is unique and unrepeatable. And this is what Venerable Bruno is asking this mother and wife, busy days and so forth, to consider every day. In the meantime, reflect each day that you are entrusted with a mission by the good God. This next is asking a lot. In regard to your temporal affairs, finances, property, and so forth, never let anything trouble you. That's asking a lot, isn't it? Never let anything trouble you. It's a grace to pray for. And the same with respect to your faults. Now, this is getting something that's very, very deep in Venerable Bruno. And the same with respect to your faults. Don't let them trouble you. Taking care to counteract them when? Immediately, by an act of love of God. Now, I want to speak with great reverence here, because this is where Venerable Bruno touches that place in our hearts that is discouraged. There's the grayness, there's the heaviness. I always lose my patience. I'm sharp with my husband. I never seem to be understanding. I always miss these opportunities to bring us closer together or to love my children in this way. I'm not as loving as I ought to be in the workplace, and on and on and on. Never let anything trouble you, not even your own faults. For many of us, that is the real discouragement. However you fill in the words, you want me to be here, Lord, but I'm here. I'm less than you want me to be. Never let anything trouble you, not even your own faults. Remember Peter in the boat with the catch of fish, when he now knows that the divine has come close to him in Jesus? And here's the boat filled almost to sinking with the fish. And Peter, who now realizes that he's close to the divine, what does he do? He's like us. He falls on his knees there at the feet of Jesus in the midst of the fish and the boat, and he says, "Depart. Depart from me, Lord. I'm a sinful man. I can't be this close to you. I don't belong here." And notice how Jesus replies. I've always loved this. Jesus doesn't argue with Peter. He just says the one thing that Peter most needs to hear. Do not be afraid. And confirms his belonging in his mission as a fisher of men. So Venerable Bruno will say, and it's good people, and reverently, it's everyone here. People, you wouldn't be here if you didn't love the Lord, people of faith, of prayer, who want to grow, and who can be burdened by the sense that I'm not all that the Lord wants me to be. And so he says to this woman, who is also sharp and impatient, but loves the Lord and her family, all the rest, don't let yourself be troubled by anything, not even by your own faults. Please take that home. Take it to heart and take it home, because it can make such a difference. All right, don't be troubled by them, but there is something you can do and should do, and do it immediately, because it'll bring hope and freshness and energy. So, never let anything trouble you, and the same with respect to your faults, taking care to counteract them immediately. Don't wait. Don't let the burden go on. Counteract them immediately by an act of a love of God. Sometimes I see people doing very generous things in God's service, and quietly, and just really admire them. And this teaching comes to mind. Faults are falling away. Sins are falling away. Because they just turn to God, I love you, and try to make it real in their lives. If you had parents here, if you have a child who has acted out, not in a good way, and comes to you and repentant and says, I love you, how are you going to respond to that? There is a moment in the life of Therese when, this is in the latter years of her life, when she's now the assistant to the novice mistress. And the youngest novice, who became Sister Maria of the Trinity and a witness at the canonization and so forth, she was not an easy character. Excuse me. Ever since I've started public speaking, I've become very grateful to what St. Francis calls our sister water. Laudato si mi Signor. por sor aqua, he says, for our sister water, which is very humble, chaste, useful, and precious. He says, beautiful description of water. Part of Therese's task was if she saw faults in these novices that needed correcting, that she would have to bring them to their attention, which was not an easy thing to do, as you can imagine, but Therese never shirked it. And so she had faced Sister Marie with some kind of something that wasn't appropriate to religious life. And Marie of the Trinity refused to accept it. And they were on the stairs, walking down the stairs down toward prayer, when Marie had a kind of a change of heart, and she just turned to Therese and whispered quickly, in the time they had there, I'm sorry, I acted badly now. And Therese later told her that when you said that to me, when you came back repentant like that to me, I cannot tell you the surge of love for you that I felt in my heart. And I found myself thinking that if I, who am a limited creature, a limited human being, could feel such love for you when you came back to me and just said, I'm sorry, what must be in the heart of God when we come turn back to Him and ask His forgiveness? So don't be troubled by anything, not even by your own faults. Taking care to counteract them immediately by an act of the love of God, and that love will wash over you, and the burden will lift from your heart. Be attentive to practice. All right, here's this woman who is strong, a leader, can be sharp and impatient. He knows her. So look what he recommends to her. Be attentive to practice the virtues of patience and gentleness. And you can make a special examination concerning this in the evening and at midday. Now, Venerable Bruno himself grew greatly in gentleness as the years of his life went by, but my sense is that this probably did not come easily to him. He was intelligent and capable, and he could make quick and wise decisions and act decisively. He lost his mother. She died when he was 4 years old, and so the feminine warmth was taken too soon from him and never really replaced in his life. That may have been another reason why he could tend easily to. But he knew it. He knew himself, and he worked diligently throughout the entirety of his life to grow in this gentleness. And I suspect that that's in the background when he's recommending to this woman who has a similar struggle. And he learned how much growth is possible when we work diligently day after day in growing in that particular area where we know we especially need to grow, which for Gabriella was patience and gentleness. The next we can almost predict at this point. So now he turns to spiritual practices. Do not forget meditation, at least for a quarter of an hour. So there's the 15 minutes again. Frequently raising up your heart to God throughout the day. There's that frequently turning to God. Remember spiritual reading, as we would expect, if it be but a single page. Finally, do not fail to receive communion at least 2 or 3 times a week, which, as I said, in the context of the time is unheard of almost. Basically what he's saying to her, get to the Eucharist, get to Mass and communion as often as you can during the week. I beg you to inform me about all these things, praying to the good God that He assists you in carrying them out. It may be that I will come myself to learn how you are doing, so perhaps I might be able now actually to visit. Why? Well, it would be a great consolation for me. As always, here's the heart. He really loves and cares about the people who come to him for help. But why might he be possible to visit? Well, it would be a great consolation for me, and I hope for it all the more, since my eyes, which continually grow weaker, will not permit me to dedicate myself to other occupations that might hinder me from coming, as happened last year. This is a beautiful thing, too. Venerable Bruno lived the years of his life with always with poor health. There was some kind of a weakness in the chest. He could, if he exerted himself, he could find it difficult to breathe, and this could go on for days. He'd be almost prostrated. His eyes were weak. Sometimes just the effort to read something would cause pain and trouble in his eyes so much that he'd just have to not use them that way sometimes for weeks. As he grew older, he developed a wound in the arm, a fistula, and later gastrointestinal struggles and so on. He dealt with physical ills for all the years of his life, but he never let them stop him. We have a letter from the man who later became general of the Jesuits, who is now Blessed Johann Ruthan, with whom Father Lanteri was in close contact for a number of years. And he writes to another Jesuit, and he says, this is when Venerable Bruno is in his 60s. He lived to be 71. And he says, Father Lanteri has just done something for the glory of God. Doesn't specify what it is. He says, given the nature of it, and given the short amount of time in which he did it, it's a miracle that a man in these conditions of health could possibly do this. He never let his poor health stop him. It was difficult, it was painful, it was hard, but he never let it stop him all the years of his life, which was incredibly fruitful, as we know. I remember watching, a number of us will remember watching St. John Paul II in the last years of his life. You remember how feeble, frail he was? I actually saw him in Rome a couple times during those years, and anybody else would have just given up. He never did. He never did. Amazing witness to us all. I remember working with a priest who was elderly and retired at that time, and he had Parkinson's. And he said, I have the same thing the Pope has. You know, just the Pope gave him so much uplift through that. So what Venerable Bruno is saying here is that because my eyes are so poor right now, I may have to give up some of the things I had planned to do. But instead of just saying, well, then there's nothing I can do, well, that will give me the opportunity to perhaps to come and visit you. So he'll do what he can. I mentioned the surgeries and the voice issues I had. I will never forget going to confession once during those years. Pretty discouraged, you know, as this happened again. I could hardly even make the confession just to get things said in the confessional. And the priest said, if you can't speak, you can write. If you can't speak, you can do ministry through the internet. And I left there very encouraged. That's Venerable Bruno, who never lets physical problems stop him, but finds a way to love and serve God in the midst of them. All right, that's the second letter. Let's take the third letter. We'll take this final letter. The occasion here is that, there's a little bit more, on this letter. I do not have time to remain longer with you in this letter as I would desire. There's enough going on right now. So I conclude by recommending myself to your holy prayers and blessing you, having the honor of being your servant and father in Jesus Christ, and so forth. Now, the occasion for the next letter is that Gabriella's youngest son, Enrico, has just died. Now, we don't know exactly how old he was, but from the vocabulary used, Venerable Bruno speaks of him in the Italian as piccolo, which is probably, let's say, 6-7 years, something like that. Certainly a young child. He's just a young boy, and he has just died. And so Venerable Bruno writes to her, he has just learned about this from her mother-in-law, that Enrico has died, and so immediately he writes to Gabriella, well understanding what's going through her heart. I want to read to you an email that I received from a woman who read, I did a podcast based on this letter, and she had listened to it through the letter. And her 18-year-old son had just died, and heroically. He had died. He had seen another young man being attacked with a knife, had gone to the assistance of this young man, saved this young man's life, but had given his own. And the mother read this letter that we're about to read, and she wrote this. March 22nd, 2019 will mark the 8th year since I lost my only child, our son, aged 18, to the swift and cruel knife of another as he intervened to save an equally young life under attack. This, the letter, is easily the most consoling message I have received on the journey. Thank you. And it's obvious that this letter meant a lot to Gabriella too, because after her death, when they were gathering the writings of Venerable Bruno, They asked Gabriella's daughter-in-law to go through her mother-in-law's papers and see if there were any of these letters. And there were the 3 that we're reading now, one of which is this letter. So he wrote many letters, I'm sure, over the years, but this was one that she always kept. Obviously, it meant a lot to her. So he writes to her, Madame, when I learned from your mother-in-law that you had lost your little Enrico, I felt great sorrow for what you must be undergoing. Again, as I say, Venerable Bruno always leads with the heart. In an earlier letter, he shared her joy because things were going well with the family. This time, he shares her sorrow, and not only feels sorrow, but as he says, great sorrow. I really felt this deeply in my heart when I learned that you lost your little son Enrico. He will have met Enrico at various times in these occasional trips to the family, so he knows this young boy and knows how much he means to her. Imagine, she lost her 2 oldest sons in early age as well, and now she loses a third of her 4 sons in this way. So he knows well what this means for this woman. I felt great sorrow for what you must be undergoing, since no sacrifice could be more painful for you. He had such wonderful qualities that he won the love of all. So he must have been just a little boy that easily drew people to him. And how much more the love of his mother. And because of this, you have every reason to feel his loss and to weep for him. Now, can you see the first thing that Venerable Bruno does when he writes to this woman is to validate her human sorrow. What he does not say to her is, I hate to even put words to these kinds of things, but just to make a point. Well, yes, you've lost your young son. I know that there's sorrow in your heart, but you're a woman of faith. You know that he lives with the Lord, so, you should move beyond this and so on. You'll never get this with Venerable Bruno. He understands the human and reverences it too much ever to respond like that. So the first thing he says to her is, you have every reason to feel sorrow. And not only that, but I feel sorrow with you. And not only sorrow, but great sorrow. No sacrifice could be more painful to you. When they bring word to Jesus that Lazarus has died, the gospel tells us that Jesus wept. And he was not ashamed of those tears. It must have been very heartening for this woman just to hear this from her spiritual guide. You have every reason to weep. No sacrifice could be more painful for you. And look at who is saying this. Venerable Bruno himself, in his own family, experienced repeated death. His mother died, as I said, when he was 4. His father died when he was 25. Already, by the time his father died, 6 of his 9 siblings had died. It was just Venerable Bruno and 2 of his brothers left at this point. He knew what it meant to lose the people that you love. And his heart reaches out to hers and understands and reverences and validates her human sorrow. But then doesn't stay there, then moves beyond to the spiritual level. Yet in another way, this is almost bold, yet in another way I share with you a joy that you have surely gained a protector in heaven who cannot fail to care for you because he is your son. Some years ago, I was asked we got the proper permissions to confirm a little girl who only lived 3 days after her birth. They knew that she wasn't going to survive. And so she was baptized immediately when she was born. And then we had the confirmation. And it's a very beautiful thing. She was born on the feast day of St. Catherine Drexel, and so they called her Catherine. And they have her grave in the cemetery, and they go often to pray for her intercession. And her father tells me that he has his own business, and there are the usual ups and downs in business, that he'll always ask her help when I need clients and so on, and somehow things always work through. This is the kind of relationship that Venerable Bruno is inviting Gabriella to have with Enrico. This relationship is not over between you and your young son. You have surely gained a protector in heaven who cannot fail to care for you because he is your Son. And because you love him so deeply, turn your thoughts to his eternal happiness, to share in his glory. And do not imagine that you have lost him. You haven't lost him. It would be wrong to think so, because yes, humanly, you have lost him from sight, but you have only lost him from sight, and not in reality. Consider that he is at your side like another angel. I wonder how often we think about our guardian angels. I've heard Dr. Peter Crave say this, whatever number, let's say we're 250 people here, well, there are 500 living beings here in this building right now. Each of us has an angel. And what Venerable Bruno is saying to Gabriella, you have another one now. Enrico, who will be like that for you as well. Consider that he is at your side like another angel, that he encourages you to dedicate yourself to the things of heaven and to share in his joy. He assures you of his efforts before the throne of the Most Holy Trinity for you, his Father, his brother, and his dear sisters, those are the two twin sisters, to obtain for all of you great and abundant graces for your eternal salvation. If you have a dear loved one who is with the Lord, you have another protector, someone who loves you and cares for you. And I think these continuing words are also why this letter must have meant so much to her. So if that's the truth of it, that this relationship is real, then here's the practical application. Remain in continual and loving conversation with him. Do you ever speak with your loved ones who are with the Lord? Only God knows, but I have no doubt in my heart that both of my parents, seeing how they lived, are with the Lord. And I have their picture on the wall of my room, and like this trip, for example, or anything important that I do before I leave the room, I stand in front of that picture and ask their intercession and their blessing. I think that prayer is heard. It's this kind of ongoing relationship. Now, what's the theological truth that underlies this? The communion of the saints, which we mention every time we say the creed. And this is real. In the communion of the saints, we have real access to, real communion with, real sharing, interaction, conversation is possible with our loved ones who are with the Lord. And so Venerable Bruno is inviting Gabrielle to make the communion of saints practical, to bring it into your daily life in terms of Enrico. Remain in continual, so often, and loving conversation with him. Speak to him about all that you experience in your own heart, all that happens in your family. That's like this man I mentioned, Catherine. Things are a little difficult at work right now. We need your help. And of anything of importance for you. Be on guard against thinking that he does not care about you or that he is powerless to help you. This next is something I've come to love. This would be to misunderstand the immense love and almost infinite power that each of the blessed enjoys. So when Gabriella turns to Enrico or you to a loved one who is with the Lord and you ask their help, Venerable Bruno says to her and to us, know that the loved one who is with the Lord, just as he or she shares God's infinite goodness and wisdom, so forth, also shares God's infinite power. And so he says this would be, if we didn't know this, would be to misunderstand not infinite, but almost infinite power that each of the blessed shares, because they share in God who is infinitely powerful. And I think of that when I turn to my parents and ask their help. They're pretty powerful now, and I know you love me. So this is what he's inviting her to do here. What if we did this? What if we lived the truth of the communion of the saints in our own families and in relation to our loved ones who are with God, with all the other divine perfections that God shares with them in the greatest possible abundance, and always against discouragement. And so, if before you had no reason to be discouraged in the service of God, you have much less reason now. Remarkable, she just lost her little son. you have less reason now than before to be discouraged, if you let your heart see this with faith. And then, kind of a nice thing, I would add that if it were possible for your little Enrico to feel any sorrow even now in heaven, of course it isn't, but it's a way of making a point, it would be to see you discouraged and saddened because of him, because of your own failings, there it is again, or because of the difficulties you encounter in the service of God. This will be the remedy for any sadness or lack of courage you may feel. The thought that, with two things, with the grace of God and the protection of your little Enrico, you can do all things. I beg you, now he turns to the other family members, I beg you to share some part of these reflections with your respected and worthy daughters, to console them also in their great affliction for the loss of their beloved brother. And again he shares with it. Tell them that I too take part in their pain and will hold them constantly present in the sacrifice of the Mass to obtain for them consolation of heart and their spiritual growth. I end this letter by blessing you all, and I am with all possible esteem and respect your servant and father in Jesus Christ, Father Bruno Lanteri, etc. Can you do a little bit more before? Well, we probably better take a break. Okay, let's take a break here. Let's take a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back for our time of prayer and reflection. Okay, so in 10 minutes we'll be back for our prayer.